The thundering hooves of Thomas Calloway's dappled gray stallion kicked up dust as he raced across the open prairie toward the small town of Willow Creek. The bouquet of wildflowers clutched in his calloused hand whipped in the wind, their delicate petals somehow holding firm against the rushing air. After 7 years of wandering the frontier, chasing gold and glory across the untamed West, he was finally coming home to the one thing he'd never been able to forget: the woman whose memory had haunted him through lonely campfires and dusty trails. It was 1876, and the country was celebrating its centennial while still nursing the wounds of a civil war that had torn it apart. The frontier was changing, civilization creeping westward like morning shadows across the plains, but Thomas had changed too. No longer the impulsive 19-year-old who'd ridden away from Willow Creek with dreams bigger than the Montana sky, he returned a man of 26 with weathered skin, a full beard, and eyes that had seen too much. As he crested the final hill overlooking the town, Thomas reined in his horse. Willow Creek had grown in his absence, new buildings lined the main street, and a proper church steeple now punctuated the skyline. But it was the small white schoolhouse at the edge of town that drew his gaze, its fresh paint gleaming in the afternoon sun. His heart hammered against his ribs, a wild thing trying to escape. "Steady now," he murmured, though whether to his horse or himself he couldn't say. The schoolhouse had been just a skeleton of lumber when he'd left, Naomi Cunningham promising it would be the finest in the territory by the time his daughter returned from teacher's college back east. Thomas wondered if old Nathaniel had kept his word, if Naomi had come back to fulfill her dream of bringing education to frontier children. He nudged his horse forward, adjusting his worn Stetson as he approached the schoolhouse. The sound of children's voices drifted through the open windows reciting multiplication tables in unison. Thomas dismounted, tethering his horse to the hitching post. He stood for a long moment, staring at the door, the wildflower bouquet dangling from his fingertips. "You come this far," he whispered to himself. "Might as well see it through." With a deep breath that did little to calm his nerves, Thomas climbed the 3 wooden steps and opened the door. The hinges creaked, announcing his presence, and 20 small faces turned toward him in unison. But Thomas saw only one person: the slender woman standing at the front of the room, her chestnut hair pinned back in a neat bun, her green eyes widening in disbelief. "Thomas." Naomi Cunningham's voice was barely audible, the chalk in her hand clattering to the floor. Time seemed to stop as they stared at each other across the classroom. The bouquet felt suddenly inadequate in his rough hands, a poor offering for the years he'd been gone. But he'd never seen anything more beautiful than Naomi in that moment, framed by sunlight streaming through the window, a vision from his most cherished memories come to life. "Hello, Naomi," Thomas finally managed, his voice thick with emotion. "I brought you something." The children's heads swiveled between their teacher and the tall stranger, sensing the electric tension in the air. One small girl with pigtails giggled behind her slate, and the spell was broken. Naomi straightened her spine, composing herself with visible effort. "Children, please continue with your arithmetic. Molly, please lead the class." She gestured to an older girl in the front row before turning back to Thomas. "Mr. Calloway, perhaps we could speak outside." Thomas nodded, backing out of the doorway, his heart sinking at the coolness in her tone. He'd imagined this moment differently during those long nights under western skies, tears of joy, perhaps, or at least a smile of welcome. Not this careful formality that felt like a wall between them. Outside, Naomi closed the door behind her, crossing her arms over her chest. Up close, Thomas could see the changes time had wrought fine lines at the corners of her eyes, a certain firmness to her jaw that spoke of determination and perhaps hardship. She was no longer the girl of 19 he'd left behind, but a woman grown. "What are you doing here, Thomas?" she asked, her voice steadier now, though still quiet enough that the children wouldn't hear. He extended the bouquet awkwardly. "I picked these along the way. Remembered how you always said wildflowers were more honest than store-bought posies." She didn't take them. 7 years, Thomas. 7 years without a word. "I wrote," he protested, lowering the flowers. 2 letters in the first year, nothing after that. Her green eyes flashed. We thought you might be dead." "There were times I nearly was," he admitted, "but that's no excuse. I should have written more." "Why are you here now?" Thomas looked down at his dusty boots, then back at her face. The practiced speech he'd rehearsed for miles evaporated from his mind. "Because I never stopped loving you, Naomi, not for a single day." She flinched as if he'd struck her, taking a step back. "You lost the right to say such things when you chose gold and adventure over what we had." "I know," he said softly. "I was a fool, but I've come back to make it right if you'll let me try." Naomi's expression softened almost imperceptibly before hardening again. "The children need me." "I can't do this now. Can I call on you? Tonight, perhaps?" She hesitated, then nodded curtly. "My father's house, 8 o'clock, don't be late." She turned to go, then paused. "Are you staying? In Willow Creek, I mean." "That depends," Thomas said honestly. "On what?" "On whether there's anything here worth staying for." Something flickered in her eyes, pain or hope. He couldn't tell. 8 o'clock, Thomas, we'll talk then." She took the bouquet from his hands, their fingers brushing briefly, sending a jolt through him. Then she disappeared back into the schoolhouse, closing the door firmly behind her. Thomas stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door. It hadn't gone as he'd hoped, but she'd agreed to see him again. It was a start. He returned to his horse, untying the reins and swinging into the saddle. "Come on, Samson," he murmured to the gray stallion. "Let's find a place to clean up. Got a mighty important call to make tonight." As he rode toward town, Thomas felt a mix of hope and dread churning in his stomach. 7 years was a long time, long enough for Naomi to have built a life without him. He wondered if she was married, though he'd seen no ring on her finger. Perhaps there was a suitor, someone more reliable than the restless young man who'd broken her heart, but he'd come too far to turn back now. Whatever awaited him in Willow Creek, heartbreak or redemption, Thomas Calloway was finally ready to face it. The Willow Creek Hotel hadn't existed when Thomas left town. Now it stood 2 stories tall on Main Street, its facade freshly painted, a testament to the town's growth. Thomas secured a room, paid extra for a hot bath, and spent the afternoon making himself presentable. He trimmed his beard, donned his one good shirt purchased in Denver for this very purpose, and polished his boots until they gleamed. At precisely 7:45, he set out for the Cunningham place, a modest but well-kept house on the eastern edge of town. Each step felt heavier than the last, memories flooding back with every familiar landmark he passed. There was the old oak where he'd first kissed Naomi after a summer dance. The creek where they'd spent lazy afternoons discussing their dreams, hers to teach, his to find his fortune and build her a house grand enough to match her spirit. The future had seemed so clear then, so certain. The Cunningham house looked much the same, though the porch had been rebuilt and a neat garden now bordered the front path. Thomas adjusted his collar, took a deep breath, and knocked on the door. Nathaniel Cunningham himself answered, his once dark hair now completely gray, his imposing frame slightly stooped with age. His eyes widened briefly before narrowing in recognition. "Thomas Calloway," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "Didn't think we'd see you in these parts again." "Mr. Cunningham?" Thomas nodded respectfully. "I've come to speak with Naomi, sir, with your permission." The older man studied him for a long moment. "She said you might come by. Got yourself cleaned up, I see." "Yes, sir." "Still doesn't make you good enough for my daughter." Thomas met his gaze steadily. "No, sir, it doesn't, but I aim to try anyway." A hint of approval flickered across Nathaniel's weathered face. "Come in, then. She's in the parlor." Thomas stepped inside, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. The house smelled of beeswax and fresh bread, homey scents that made his heart ache with familiarity. Nathaniel led him to the parlor, where Naomi sat in a rocking chair, a book open on her lap. She looked up as they entered, her expression guarded. "Thomas is here," Nathaniel announced unnecessarily. "I'll be in my study if you need me." The warning in his tone was clear as he retreated, leaving the door conspicuously open. Thomas remained standing, hat in hand, suddenly tongue-tied in Naomi's presence. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way he remembered well. In the warm lamplight, she looked so much like the girl he'd left behind that his chest tightened painfully. "Please sit," she finally said, gesturing to the chair opposite hers. He lowered himself carefully, balancing his hat on his knee. "Your father seems well." "He is," she replied, "though his rheumatism troubles him in the winter." Silence stretched between them, taut and uncomfortable. Thomas cleared his throat. "The schoolhouse, it's just as you described in your letters. Your father built it just as he promised." A small smile touched her lips. "Yes, he wanted it perfect for when I returned from teacher's college." She hesitated. "The whole town helped, even Mrs. Whitaker, who said educating girls beyond their letters was a waste of good cooking time." Thomas chuckled. "Some things never change." "And some things do," Naomi said quietly, her smile fading. "Why have you come back, Thomas? The truth this time." He set his hat aside, leaning forward. "I told you the truth this afternoon, Naomi. I never stopped loving you. Love doesn't disappear for 7 years without a word." "I know." He ran a hand through his hair. "After those first 2 letters, I was ashamed. The gold claim I'd staked went bust. Then I took work as a ranch hand, telling myself I'd write when I had something to show for myself. But the months turned into years, and the longer I stayed away, the harder it seemed to reach out. I waited," she said simply. "For 3 years I waited. Every rider who came through town, every mail delivery. I thought surely the next one would bring word from you." The pain in her voice cut through him like a knife. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "No," she agreed. "You don't." Thomas nodded, accepting the judgment. "I understand if you want me to leave town, but before I go, I need you to know that walking away from you was the biggest mistake of my life. Not a day went by that I didn't think of you, Naomi." She studied him, her green eyes searching his face. "What changed? Why come back now?" Thomas reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small, worn book. "This," he said, placing it on the table between them. Naomi's eyes widened as she recognized the volume of Tennyson's poetry she'd given him before he left. "You kept it. It's been with me every step of the way." He opened it carefully to reveal a pressed wildflower between the pages. "Remember the day we picked these in the meadow? The day before you left," she whispered. "I was in Dodge City 3 months ago. Met a man there who'd lost everything: his wife, his children, his home, all because he chose the wrong path, chose adventure over love. Seeing his regret, his emptiness. It was like looking at my own future." Thomas closed the book gently. "I knew then I had to come back, even if it was just to tell you I was sorry." Naomi reached for the book, her fingers tracing the worn leather cover. "And if I've moved on, if there's someone else," Thomas's heart faltered. "Is there?" She was silent for a long moment. "The town banker, Samuel Hargrove, has been calling on me for nearly a year now." The name struck Thomas like a physical blow. He remembered Samuel Hargrove, a few years older than them, always proper and respectable, the kind of steady man Naomi deserved. "I see." "He's asked me to marry him," she continued, her voice carefully neutral. "Twice now." Thomas forced himself to meet her eyes. "And your answer?" "I told him I needed time to consider." Hope flickered in Thomas's chest, fragile as a candle flame. "Why?" Naomi looked away, her fingers still resting on the poetry book. "I thought it was just sensible caution. Now I wonder if some part of me was still waiting." "Naomi," Thomas said softly, "I didn't come back to disrupt your life. If you care for Hargrove, I respect him," she interrupted. "He's kind and dependable. But do you love him?" Her eyes met his again, challenging. "Do I love him like I loved you, you mean? With that reckless, all-consuming feeling that made everything else fade away?" She shook her head. "No, but that kind of love brought me nothing but heartache." Thomas flinched but didn't look away. "I can't change the past, but I'm not the same man who left, Naomi. I've learned what matters." "Pretty words," she said. "But how do I know you won't grow restless again, that the call of adventure won't prove stronger than your promises?" "Because I've seen what lies down that road, and it's empty," he replied honestly. "Because I've had adventure enough to last a lifetime, and none of it filled the hole you left. Because I'm not asking for promises from you, just a chance to show you who I've become." Naomi was silent, conflict evident in her expression. Finally, she sighed. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Thomas." "I understand that," he said quietly. "Trust has to be earned. I'm prepared to earn it, however long it takes. And if I decide to marry Samuel?" The question lanced through him, but he forced himself to answer truthfully. Then I'll wish you happiness and move on, but I had to try, Naomi. I had to know if there was still a chance for us. She handed the poetry book back to him, their fingers brushing again. I need time to think. Of course, he said, rising from his chair. Thank you for seeing me tonight. As he turned to leave, she spoke again. Thomas, where will you stay? In town, I mean. I've taken a room at the hotel for now, I thought. Well, I heard Jenkins's old blacksmith shop is vacant. Thought I might inquire about it. Surprise crossed her face. You're thinking of settling here? As a blacksmith, I apprenticed with one in Colorado for a time, learned the trade well enough. He shrugged. It's honest work and I'm good with my hands. You always were, she said softly, a memory passing between them of the small wooden carvings he used to make for her. Good night, Naomi, Thomas said, settling his hat back on his head. I'll call again with your permission, she nodded, something unreadable in her eyes. Good night, Thomas. As he stepped out into the cool evening air, Thomas felt a curious mixture of hope and resignation. She hadn't sent him away, but neither had she welcomed him back. It was a beginning, however uncertain. The next morning, Thomas made inquiries about Jenkins's old blacksmith shop. The building was indeed available, having stood empty since the old man's death the previous winter. By noon, Thomas had struck a deal with the banker ironically. Samuel Hargrove himself to lease the property with an option to buy if he proved successful. Hargrove was coolly professional during their transaction, giving no indication he knew of Thomas's history with Naomi. But as Thomas signed the final papers, the banker fixed him with a level stare. Miss Cunningham is highly regarded in this community, Mr. Calloway, he said, his tone conversational but his meaning clear. She's done remarkable work with the school. I have no doubt of it, Thomas replied evenly. She always did have a gift for teaching. Indeed. Hargrove shuffled the papers into a neat stack. I trust your return to Willow Creek won't disrupt the stability she's found here. Thomas met the man's gaze directly. My intentions toward Miss Cunningham are honorable, Mr. Hargrove. As are mine, the banker replied, a challenge in his eyes. Good day, Mr. Calloway. I wish you success with your business venture. The exchange confirmed what Thomas had suspected. Hargrove was serious about Naomi, and he saw Thomas as a threat. The realization spurred him to work even harder. If he was to have any chance of winning back Naomi's trust, he needed to prove himself a changed man, reliable, hardworking, committed to building a life in Willow Creek. For the next 2 weeks, Thomas threw himself into renovating the blacksmith shop. He repaired the roof, rebuilt the forge, and ordered new tools from the mercantile. The physical labor was therapeutic, giving him purpose while he waited for some sign from Naomi. He saw her occasionally in town, exchanging polite greetings that revealed nothing of her thoughts. Once he spotted her walking with Hargrove after Sunday services, the banker attentive at her side. The sight had twisted something in Thomas's gut, but he'd merely tipped his hat respectfully as they passed. Word of his return spread quickly through the small town. Some folks welcomed him warmly, remembering the earnest young man he'd been. Others were more reserved, perhaps sensing the potential drama of his reappearance in Naomi's life. Thomas weathered it all with quiet dignity, focusing on establishing himself as a permanent fixture in Willow Creek. On a crisp Saturday morning, as Thomas was stoking the newly rebuilt forge for a test run, the shop door swung open. He looked up, expecting a curious townsperson, and was startled to find Naomi standing in the doorway, a basket over her arm. Miss Cunningham, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. This is an unexpected pleasure. The children have been talking about nothing but the new blacksmith, she said, stepping inside. I thought I should see for myself what all the excitement is about. Thomas glanced around the half-finished shop. It's not much to look at yet, but it will be. You've accomplished a great deal in 2 weeks. She set the basket on his workbench. I brought you some lunch. Teaching has taught me that men working hard often forget to eat. The gesture caught him off guard. That's very kind of you. It's just some bread and cheese, she said, sounding almost embarrassed. And apple pie. I remembered it was your favorite. Still is, he said softly. Thank you, Naomi. She wandered the shop, examining his work with genuine interest. So you truly intend to stay? To be Willow Creek's blacksmith? I do. Thomas leaned against the workbench, watching her. Unless you'd rather I didn't. Naomi turned to face him. It's not my place to decide who stays or goes in this town. But your opinion matters to me, he said. If my presence here causes you pain, it doesn't, she interrupted. Not pain exactly, she sighed, running her fingers along the edge of his anvil. Confusion, perhaps, memories I thought I'd put to rest. Good memories, I hope. A small smile touched her lips. Some of them. They fell silent, the crackling of the forge the only sound in the shop. Finally, Thomas spoke. Naomi, I know I have no right to ask, but have you decided about Hargrove's proposal? She met his gaze steadily. I told him I couldn't accept, not now. Thomas's heart leaped, but he kept his expression carefully neutral. Because of my return, partly, she admitted, it wouldn't be fair to marry him while I'm unsettled. I'm sorry if I've complicated things for you. Are you? She challenged, a flash of the spirited girl he remembered breaking through her composed exterior. No, he said honestly. I'm not sorry for that, but I am sorry for any distress it's causing you. Naomi's expression softened. Life was simpler before you came back. Simpler isn't always better. No, she agreed quietly. It isn't. Their eyes held for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Thomas wanted nothing more than to cross the space between them, to take her in his arms as he once had, but he knew better than to push too fast. I should go, Naomi said finally, breaking the spell. The children are putting on a pageant next Friday evening, stories of local history. You should come if you're interested. I'd like that, Thomas said. Thank you for the invitation, and for lunch. She nodded, moving toward the door. Good day, Thomas, Naomi, he called as she reached the threshold. She paused, looking back at him. I meant what I said, about earning your trust, however long it takes. Something flickered in her eyes, vulnerability, perhaps, or hope. I'll see you at the pageant, she said softly, and then she was gone. Thomas stared at the doorway long after she disappeared, a cautious optimism building within him. She'd rejected Hargrove's proposal. She'd brought him lunch, remembered his favorite pie. Small things, perhaps, but significant from a woman who had every reason to shut him out completely. The next few days passed in a blur of work, as Thomas prepared to open the blacksmith shop officially. Word spread that he was accepting simple jobs repairing tools, shoeing horses, and townspeople began to trickle in with work. Each successful job, each satisfied customer, helped cement his place in the community. When Friday evening arrived, Thomas closed the shop early, bathed, and put on his best clothes before heading to the schoolhouse. Lanterns illuminated the path, and the building was packed with proud parents and community members when he arrived. He slipped into a seat at the back, scanning the room until he spotted Naomi at the front, organizing the excited children. The pageant was charming local tales of settlers and native tribes, the founding of Willow Creek, and important events in the town's short history, all acted out by children in homemade costumes. Thomas watched with genuine enjoyment, but his eyes kept returning to Naomi. She beamed with pride at her pupils, occasionally mouthing lines from the sidelines when a child forgot their part. After the final bow and enthusiastic applause, the audience mingled while enjoying refreshments the mothers had provided. Thomas hung back, watching as Naomi accepted compliments on the performance. Several times he caught her glancing in his direction, though she made no move to approach him. As the crowd began to thin, Thomas decided it was time to leave. He'd nearly reached the door when he heard her voice behind him. You're not leaving without saying hello, are you? He turned to find Naomi standing there, her cheeks flushed from the evening's excitement. I didn't want to intrude. You seemed busy with the parents. And now I'm not, she said. What did you think of the pageant? It was wonderful, he said sincerely. You've done amazing work with these children. She smiled, genuine pleasure lighting her face. They worked so hard, even Billy Thompson, who'd rather be fishing than learning history. I noticed he made a very convincing trapper. It was the only way to get him involved, she laughed. I promised he could carry a prop rifle. The sound of her laughter warmed something in Thomas's chest. You always did know how to bring out the best in people. Her smile softened. Not always, she said, a hint of their shared past in her tone. "The failure was mine, not yours," he replied quietly. Before she could respond, one of the mothers called her name, needing help with a tearful child. "I should go," Naomi said, apologetic. "Of course." Thomas tipped his hat. "It was a fine evening, Miss Cunningham. Your students are lucky to have you." As he turned to leave, she reached out, her fingers brushing his arm. "Thomas, a few of us are having a picnic by the creek tomorrow after church. You're welcome to join us if you'd like." The invitation caught him by surprise. "I'd be honored." "Good," she said, looking pleased. "Until tomorrow, then." Thomas walked back to his quarters above the blacksmith shop with a lighter step than he'd had in years. The evening had confirmed what he'd started to hope. Naomi was opening the door to him, if only a crack. The next day dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for a picnic. Thomas attended the church service, sitting toward the back, conscious of the curious glances sent his way. Naomi sat with her father several pews ahead, her back straight, her attention fixed on Reverend Parker's sermon about forgiveness and redemption. Thomas couldn't help wondering if the choice of topic was coincidental. After the service, he followed the small group that made its way to the creek. Naomi and her father, the Reverend and his wife, the schoolteacher from the neighboring town and his family, and a few others Thomas vaguely remembered from his youth. They settled in a grassy clearing beside the water, spreading blankets and unpacking baskets of food. Thomas hung back until Naomi waved him over, patting the space on her blanket. "Join us," she said. "Mrs. Parker was just asking about your blacksmith shop." The afternoon passed pleasantly as Thomas found himself drawn into the community's circle, answering questions about his travels, discussing plans for his business, even offering to help with repairs to the church steeple. Nathaniel Cunningham remained somewhat reserved, but thawed visibly when Thomas spoke knowledgeably about the latest farming equipment he'd encountered in his travels. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the gathering broke up, families collecting their belongings and heading back to town. Thomas helped Naomi fold her blanket, aware of her father watching them from a discreet distance. "Thank you for including me today," Thomas said as they walked back toward town, Nathaniel a few paces ahead. "You belong here," Naomi said simply. "You always did." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Before Thomas could respond, they reached the edge of town where their paths would diverge, Naomi toward her father's house, Thomas toward his shop. "I should go," she said. "School tomorrow." Thomas nodded. "May I walk you home?" She glanced at her father's retreating back, then shook her head with a small smile. "Not tonight, but perhaps. Perhaps you might escort me to the Founders' Day dance next Saturday." His heart leaped. "I'd like nothing better." "Good," she said, her eyes bright. "Good night, Thomas." As she hurried to catch up with her father, Thomas stood watching, a sense of possibility unfurling within him. The path back to Naomi's heart would be long and uncertain, but for the first time since his return, he truly believed it might lead somewhere. The week leading up to the Founders' Day dance passed in a productive blur for Thomas. Word of his skill had spread, bringing a steady stream of customers to his shop. He worked hard, establishing himself as reliable and fair, determined to prove he was no longer the restless boy who'd abandoned Willow Creek for greener pastures. On Wednesday afternoon, as he was repairing a plow blade, the shop door opened to admit Samuel Hargrove. The banker was impeccably dressed as always, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the busy workshop. "Mr. Hargrove," Thomas nodded, setting aside his tools. "What can I do for you?" "I need to speak with you, Calloway," Hargrove said stiffly. "About a personal matter." Thomas wiped his hands on a rag, gesturing to the small office area he'd set up in the corner. "Please." Once they were seated, Hargrove came straight to the point. "I understand you're escorting Miss Cunningham to the Founders' Day dance." "I am," Thomas confirmed, meeting the man's gaze steadily. "At her invitation." "I see." Hargrove's fingers drummed once on the desk before going still. "I won't pretend I'm pleased about this development. As you likely know, I've been courting Naomi for some time." "She mentioned it," Thomas said carefully. "She's declined my proposals twice now," Hargrove continued, "the second time shortly after your return." His eyes narrowed slightly. "I find the timing significant." Thomas considered his words carefully. "Mr. Hargrove, I have the highest respect for you, but my history with Naomi predates your courtship. A history that includes abandonment, Hargrove said sharply. The accusation stung, but Thomas couldn't deny its truth. Yes, a mistake I deeply regret and hope to make amends for. And if you succeed in winning her back, what then? How long before the wanderlust takes you again, leaving her heartbroken once more? Hargrove leaned forward. I can offer Naomi stability, security, a respectable position in this community. What can you offer that compares? The question hung in the air between them. Thomas took a deep breath. Love, he said simply. The kind that persists across years and distance, the kind I suspect you've never felt for her for all your talk of security and respectability. Hargrove's face flushed. You presume too much. Perhaps, Thomas conceded. But ask yourself this: do you love Naomi for herself, or for the picture she makes as the banker's wife? Do you listen when she talks about her dreams for the school, her ideas for education on the frontier? Do you understand what teaching means to her? A flicker of uncertainty crossed Hargrove's face before his expression hardened again. My feelings for Naomi are not your concern. No, Thomas agreed. They're not. Just as your feelings about our relationship aren't mine or Naomi's. She's a grown woman capable of making her own choices. Hargrove stood abruptly. I came here to warn you, Calloway. Don't hurt her again. This town has watched her rebuild her life after you left. If you're not absolutely certain of your intentions, I am, Thomas interrupted, rising to face the banker. More certain than I've ever been of anything. The two men stared at each other for a long moment before Hargrove gave a curt nod. For her sake, I hope you mean that. He turned to go, then paused. You've done good work with this place. The town needs a skilled blacksmith. It was as close to acceptance as Thomas was likely to get from the man. Thank you. After Hargrove left, Thomas returned to his work, the banker's words echoing in his mind. The man had asked fair questions. What could Thomas offer Naomi that would make up for the pain he'd caused? Was love enough? When weighed against the security and respectability Hargrove represented, Thomas had no easy answers, only the certainty that he'd spend a lifetime trying to be worthy of her, if she gave him the chance. Saturday evening arrived clear and mild, perfect weather for the outdoor dance to be held in the town square. Thomas dressed with care in his best clothes, including a new vest purchased from the mercantile specifically for the occasion. He'd spent the afternoon helping set up the square, stringing lanterns between posts and assembling the platform where the musicians would play. As the sun began to set, he made his way to the Cunningham house, a fresh bouquet of wildflowers in hand. Nathaniel answered his knock, eyeing Thomas's attire with grudging approval. Evening, Calloway, he said gruffly. You're prompt at least. Yes, sir, Thomas replied. Is Naomi ready? Nearly. Nathaniel hesitated, then stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. Need to have a word with you first. Thomas straightened, bracing himself. Of course. My daughter seems determined to give you another chance, Nathaniel said bluntly. Can't say I approve, considering how things ended last time. I understand your concerns, sir. Do you? The older man's eyes narrowed. She cried for months after you left, wouldn't eat, barely slept. Had to send her to her aunt's in Denver just to get her mind right again. Thomas flinched at the image. I didn't know. Course you didn't. You were off chasing gold and glory. Nathaniel shook his head. Naomi's strong, always has been, but even strong people can break when their heart's been trampled. Sir, Thomas said earnestly, I know I don't deserve her forgiveness, but I swear to you I'm not the same man who left. If she gives me another chance, I'll spend every day proving it. Nathaniel studied him for a long moment. You always did have a way with words, Calloway, but words are wind. It's actions that matter. Yes, sir, I intend to show you both through my actions. The door opened behind them, and they turned to find Naomi standing in the doorway. She wore a simple but elegant blue dress, her chestnut hair arranged in soft curls around her face. The sight of her stole Thomas's breath. Papa, she said, her eyes moving between the two men. Is everything all right? Just having a chat with your escort, Nathaniel said, his tone softening. You look beautiful, daughter. Thank you. She stepped onto the porch, her gaze finding Thomas's. Are those for me? Thomas realized he was still clutching the wildflowers. Yes, he said, offering them to her. I picked them this afternoon. She accepted the bouquet with a smile that made his heart stutter. They're lovely. Let me put them in water before we go. When she disappeared back inside, Nathaniel turned to Thomas once more. She deserves happiness, Calloway. Yes, sir, she does. See that you remember that. With a final, meaningful look, Nathaniel retreated into the house, leaving Thomas alone on the porch. Naomi returned moments later, drawing the door closed behind her. Shall we? She asked, accepting Thomas's offered arm. They walked toward the town square in companionable silence, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. As they approached, they could hear the fiddle and piano already playing, the square filled with townspeople in their finest clothes. You look beautiful tonight, Thomas said, glancing at her profile. But then you always do. A blush colored her cheeks. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Calloway. The benefits of regular bathing and a steady income, he chuckled. Frontier life doesn't allow for much vanity. And yet here you are, looking every inch the respectable businessman, she observed. The children talk about you constantly, you know. Mr. Calloway let me work the bellows. Mr. Calloway showed me how to bend metal. Thomas smiled, pleased. They're welcome at the shop anytime. Might spark an interest in the trade for some of them. Already thinking of apprentices, Naomi teased. You've only just begun. It's never too early to plan for the future, he replied, his tone light but his meaning clear. Her eyes met his, something soft and uncertain in their depths. Before she could respond, they reached the square, where several people greeted them warmly. The moment passed, but Thomas felt a shift between them, a tentative step toward something new. The evening unfolded pleasantly as they danced beneath the lantern light, Thomas rediscovering the joy of having Naomi in his arms, even if only during the formality of a Virginia reel or a waltz. They took breaks to sample the refreshments and chat with townspeople, many of whom seemed increasingly accepting of Thomas's presence at Naomi's side. During a lively square dance, Thomas found himself partnered briefly with Mrs. Parker, the Reverend's wife, who fixed him with a knowing smile. It does my heart good to see you two together again, she said as they circled each other. Naomi's smile hasn't been this bright in years. Thomas glanced across the dance at Naomi, who was laughing at something her partner had said. I'm grateful she's giving me a second chance. Love deserves second chances, Mrs. Parker said sagely, when it's true. As the evening wore on, the tempo of the music slowed. Thomas led Naomi to the dance floor for a waltz, her hand warm in his, her waist beneath his palm stirring memories of other dances, other nights. Do you remember the harvest dance? He asked softly as they moved together. The first time we danced like this, you stepped on my toes 3 times, she recalled, a smile playing at her lips. You were too polite to mention it. I didn't want to embarrass you, she admitted. You looked so nervous. I was, Thomas chuckled. Terrified I'd make a fool of myself in front of the prettiest girl in the county. Naomi's eyes met his, something vulnerable in their depths. You're not stepping on my toes now. I've learned a few things over the years, he said quietly, including how precious a dance can be. They moved in silence for a few moments, the music wrapping around them like a cocoon, separating them from the crowd. Thomas was acutely aware of her closeness, the subtle scent of lavender in her hair, the trust implicit in the way she followed his lead. Thomas, she said finally, her voice barely audible above the music. Why did you really come back? He understood the question was deeper than it seemed, not about his return to Willow Creek, but his return to her life. Because every place I went, every achievement, every failure. None of it meant anything without you to share it with. Her steps faltered slightly before finding the rhythm again. That's a lovely sentiment. It's the truth, he said simply. I could have settled anywhere, Naomi. I chose to come back here because this is where my heart has always been. With you, she looked up at him, her expression unguarded for the first time since his return. I want to believe you, then believe me, he whispered. Or if you can't yet, let me prove it to you, day by day. The music drew to a close, but they remained standing close together, the moment fragile and charged with possibility. Around them, couples moved off the dance floor, but Thomas couldn't bring himself to release her just yet. It's getting late, Naomi said finally, though she made no move to step away. I should probably head home. May I walk you? Thomas asked. She nodded, and they made their farewells before leaving the square, the sound of music and laughter fading behind them as they walked toward the Cunningham house. The night was cool now, stars brilliant in the clear sky above. I had a wonderful time tonight, Naomi said as they strolled. So did I, Thomas replied. Thank you for inviting me. They reached her porch too soon, the lamplight from inside casting a warm glow through the curtained windows. Thomas turned to face her, reluctant for the evening to end. Naomi, he began, then hesitated, suddenly unsure. Yes. She prompted gently. I know I have no right to ask for your heart again, he said carefully, but I'd like permission to court you properly, to show you who I am now and what you mean to me. She looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. Samuel asked me the same question, you know. If he could court me officially, Thomas's heart sank. I see. I told him no, she continued. I said my heart wasn't free to consider him that way. Hope bloomed in his chest, and is it free to consider me? Naomi reached up, her fingers lightly touching his cheek in a gesture so tender it nearly undid him. My heart was never free of you, Thomas. That was the problem. Naomi, he breathed, covering her hand with his own. I'm still afraid, she admitted. Afraid that one day you'll grow restless again, that Willow Creek will become too small, too predictable, that I won't be enough. You've always been more than enough, Thomas said fervently. It was me who wasn't ready to recognize what I had. I needed to wander to realize that everything I was searching for was right here all along. She studied his face in the dim light, as if looking for some sign of uncertainty. If we do this, if I let you court me, I need your promise. No more disappearing, Thomas. No more unanswered letters. If you ever feel the need to leave again, you talk to me first. I promise, he said without hesitation. On everything I hold dear. Naomi nodded, a decision settling in her eyes. Then yes, you may court me, Thomas Calloway. Joy surged through him, and he couldn't resist bringing her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. You won't regret it, Naomi, I swear. A smile bloomed on her face, genuine and warm. Good night, Thomas. Good night, he replied, reluctantly releasing her hand and stepping back as she entered the house. As he walked back to his shop, Thomas felt lighter than he had in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust once broken wasn't quickly mended, but Naomi had opened the door. The rest was up to him. Over the next month, Thomas courted Naomi with a patience and thoughtfulness that surprised even himself. They began slowly, with walks after church and occasional shared meals. Thomas was careful not to rush, understanding that Naomi needed time to rebuild her trust in him. He found ways to weave himself into her daily life, repairing items at the schoolhouse, crafting special tools for her students' projects, surprising her with small, thoughtful gifts that showed he was paying attention to her needs and interests. A custom-made pointer for the classroom maps. A wrought iron stand for her favorite potted plant. A repaired music box that had belonged to her mother. For her part, Naomi gradually lowered her defenses, allowing Thomas glimpses of the woman she had become in his absence, confident in her profession, respected in the community, yet still possessing the warmth and compassion that had first drawn him to her. They spoke often of the years they'd been apart, filling in the gaps in each other's lives. Thomas shared stories of his travels, the majestic mountains of Colorado, the vast plains of Kansas, the bustling streets of Denver, while Naomi told him of her time at Teachers College, her struggles to establish the school in Willow Creek, her dreams for education on the frontier. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch swing at her father's house, Naomi broached a subject they'd both been avoiding. Why didn't you write, Thomas, after those first 2 letters? He was silent for a moment, considering how to answer truthfully. Pride at first, he finally said. My grand plans for striking it rich failed spectacularly. I was ashamed to tell you I'd given up on the gold claim, taken work as a ranch hand. I wouldn't have judged you for that. I know that now, Thomas sighed, but there was more to it. The longer I stayed away, the more I convinced myself you'd be better off without me. That someone like Hargrove, steady, reliable, would make you happier than a drifter with empty pockets and big dreams. Naomi turned to face him fully. That wasn't your decision to make. No, he agreed. It wasn't. I robbed us both of those years, Naomi. It's my greatest regret. She was quiet for a long moment, the swing creaking gently beneath them. When did you know you wanted to come back? I never stopped wanting to, he admitted. But I convinced myself it was selfish. That you'd moved on, that returning would only disrupt your life. He smiled ruefully. It took seeing another man's regret to recognize my own foolishness. The man in Dodge City you mentioned, Thomas nodded. William Forrester lost his family because he chose adventure over love. By the time he realized his mistake, his wife had remarried, his children barely remembered him. He looked at Naomi, his expression somber. I saw my future in his eyes, and it terrified me. Naomi reached for his hand, twining their fingers together. I'm glad you came back. Even though it complicated your life, he asked, remembering her words from weeks ago. Especially because of that, she said softly. Some complications are worth having, Thomas. The simple statement and the warmth of her hand in his gave Thomas the courage to ask the question that had been on his mind. Naomi, would you ride with me tomorrow? There's something I'd like to show you. She looked intrigued. Where? It's a surprise, he said. But I promise it's worth the journey. All right, she agreed with a smile. After school lets out, perfect. The next afternoon, Thomas arrived at the schoolhouse just as the children were leaving, a picnic basket secured to his saddle, and a gentle mare borrowed from the livery stable for Naomi. She emerged from the building in her riding skirt, looking curious and slightly apprehensive. Should I be concerned about this mystery expedition? She asked as he helped her mount. Not at all, he assured her. It's not far, and I think you'll approve of the destination. They rode east out of town, following the creek for about 2 miles before turning north toward a small rise. Thomas led the way, occasionally glancing back to make sure Naomi was comfortable. She rode well, her posture graceful, her expression becoming more curious as they left familiar territory. Finally, they crested the rise, and Thomas reined in his horse, waiting for Naomi to join him. Below them stretched a small valley, sheltered by hills on 3 sides, a stand of cottonwoods providing shade near where the creek meandered through. It's beautiful, Naomi said, taking in the peaceful scene. But why bring me here? Thomas dismounted, helping her down from her horse. Because it's ours, he said simply, or it could be. Her eyes widened. What do you mean? I've purchased this land, he explained, leading her toward the cottonwoods. 40 acres, including this valley and the hillside behind it. You bought land. Naomi looked stunned. When? How? Last week. I've been saving every penny from the blacksmith shop. He gestured around them. I thought it would be perfect for a home, close enough to town for my business and your school, but with space and privacy. Naomi turned slowly, taking in the valley anew. You're planning to build a house here. I'm hoping to, Thomas said carefully. But that depends on you, Naomi. She looked back at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. On me. Thomas took her hands in his heart hammering in his chest. I didn't just come back to Willow Creek to make amends or even just to court you again. I came back because I want a future with you, a home, a family, a life together. Tears welled in Naomi's eyes. Thomas, I'm not proposing, he quickly clarified. Not yet. I know we're still finding our way back to each other, but I wanted you to see this place, to know that I'm committed to building something permanent here. With you, if you'll have me. A tear slipped down her cheek, and Thomas reached up to brush it away, his touch gentle. I never stopped loving you, Naomi, not for a single day in all these years. I tried to stop loving you, she whispered. I truly did. It would have been so much easier. And did you succeed? He asked, scarcely breathing. She shook her head, a small, wondering smile breaking through her tears. Not even close. The admission, so simple and yet so profound, broke something open in Thomas's chest. He drew her into his arms, holding her close as the breeze rustled through the cottonwoods above them. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucked beneath his chin, her arms around his waist. I've thought about this moment so many times, he murmured into her hair. Holding you again, Naomi leaned back slightly to look up at him. So have I, she admitted. Even when I was angriest with you, I miss this. Thomas's gaze dropped to her lips, a question in his eyes. Naomi answered by rising on her toes, closing the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative with the weight of years apart, but quickly deepened into something more urgent, more honest. Thomas's hands cradled her face as if she were precious beyond measure, while Naomi's fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt, holding him close. When they finally parted, both breathless, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I should have shown you this place sooner," he said, drawing a laugh from Naomi that warmed him to his core. "The timing was perfect," she assured him, stepping back but keeping hold of his hand. "Now show me where you imagine this house of yours." "Ours," he corrected gently. "I imagine it as ours." They spent the next hour walking the property, Thomas pointing out where he envisioned the house: a barn, gardens, an orchard. Naomi listened and offered suggestions, her initial surprise giving way to genuine enthusiasm as the dream took shape between them. Eventually, they settled beneath the cottonwoods for the picnic Thomas had packed. As they ate, conversation flowed easily between them, the last remnants of reserve melting away in the warmth of shared hopes for the future. "What will your father say?" Thomas asked as they packed up the remains of their meal. "About us, I mean," Naomi smiled. "He's been watching you these past weeks, your commitment to the business, to the community. He's not as opposed as he once was." "That's encouraging," Thomas said dryly. From outright disapproval to not as opposed, she laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet valley. "Give him time. He's protective, especially after last time." Thomas nodded, sobering. "I understand, I hurt his daughter." "Yes," Naomi acknowledged, "but you came back." That counts for something with him, even if he won't admit it. As the sun began its descent toward the western hills, they reluctantly mounted their horses for the ride back to town. The return journey was companionable, their conversation punctuated by comfortable silences and occasional shared smiles. At the edge of town, as the buildings of Willow Creek came into view, Naomi reined in her horse. "Thomas," he stopped beside her. "Yes, thank you for today. For showing me the land, for sharing your dream with me." "Thank you for being part of it," he replied. She smiled, the setting sun catching in her hair. "I'm glad you came home, Thomas Calloway." The simple statement held a world of meaning. Home, not just to Willow Creek, but to her. "So am I, Naomi," he said softly. "So am I." As summer bloomed across the Montana territory, Thomas and Naomi's courtship deepened. They became a familiar sight in Willow Creek, walking together after church, sharing meals at the cafe, sitting side by side at community gatherings. The town, which had initially regarded Thomas's return with skepticism, gradually accepted the rekindled relationship, especially as his blacksmith business became an integral part of the community. True to his word, Thomas began preparations for building on his land. He hired men to clear the house site and dig a well, ordered lumber from the sawmill, and spent his spare time drawing up plans that incorporated Naomi's suggestions. The project gave physical form to their future together, each beam and nail a testament to his commitment. Naomi, meanwhile, found herself blooming in ways she hadn't expected. The caution she'd carried since Thomas's return gradually gave way to joy and anticipation. She introduced him to her students more formally, inviting him to demonstrate blacksmithing techniques as part of their lessons on frontier trades. The children adored him, especially when he crafted small iron toys for them to take home. One evening in late July, as they sat on the fallen log by the creek that had become their favorite spot on the property, Naomi broached a subject that had been on her mind. "Thomas, when do you think the house will be ready?" he considered, mentally reviewing the progress. "With good weather and no delays in materials, perhaps by early November." "Why do you ask?" She looked at him, something resolute in her expression. "Because I think we should be married before winter." Thomas stared at her, momentarily speechless. "Naomi, are you proposing to me?" A smile curved her lips. "I believe I am, unless you object," he laughed, pulling her into his arms. "Object? Naomi Cunningham, I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet pouch. Naomi's eyes widened as he opened it, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a small diamond flanked by 2 emeralds. "Thomas, it's beautiful. It reminded me of your eyes," he said softly, taking her hand. "Naomi, I've loved you since we were hardly more than children." I've loved you through 7 years apart and these past months together. I want to love you for the rest of our days." He slid from the log to one knee before her. "Will you marry me?" Tears shimmered in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Thomas Calloway, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, Naomi rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Your father might have something to say about a fall wedding," Thomas noted, running his fingers through her hair. Naomi smiled against his shirt. "He's expecting it, actually. He asked me last week when you were finally going to make an honest woman of me." Thomas pulled back to look at her, surprised. "He did, she nodded. "He said you'd taken long enough to get around to it." "And here I've been worried about asking his permission," Thomas chuckled. "Oh, you still need to do that," Naomi said, her eyes twinkling. "He'll expect it. But I don't think you need to worry too much about his answer." The next morning, Thomas closed the blacksmith shop early and made his way to the Cunningham farm, where Nathaniel was mending a fence in the south pasture. The older man straightened as Thomas approached, wiping sweat from his brow. "Calloway," he nodded in greeting. "Bit early for you to be away from the shop, isn't it?" "Yes, sir," Thomas agreed, "but I needed to speak with you on an important matter." Nathaniel's expression revealed nothing as he set down his tools. "About my daughter, I presume." "Yes, sir." Thomas took a deep breath. "Mr. Cunningham, I'd like your permission to marry Naomi." The older man studied him for a long moment. "You planning to build that house out on the Miller property before winter?" Thomas blinked, surprised that Nathaniel knew about the land purchase. "Yes, sir." "Work's already begun." "Good land," Nathaniel nodded. "Good water source protected from the north wind." He picked up his hammer again, turning back to the fence. "You'll take care of her this time, with everything I am," Thomas promised. Nathaniel drove a nail into the fence post with a single powerful stroke. "Then you have my blessing." He looked up, his expression softening slightly. "She loves you, Calloway, always has. Don't make her regret it." "I won't, sir," Thomas said fervently. "Thank you." As he turned to go, Nathaniel called after him. "One more thing, Calloway." Thomas looked back. "Sir, about time you started calling me Nathaniel." A rare smile crossed the older man's weathered face. "Since we're to be family and all." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity as Thomas and Naomi prepared for both their wedding and their new home. The date was set for October 15th, allowing time for the house to be completed before the harsh Montana winter set in. Naomi continued teaching while planning the wedding and helping design the interior of their home. Thomas divided his time between the blacksmith shop and overseeing construction, often working alongside the builders to ensure everything was done to his specifications. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Willow Creek, met with general approval and good wishes. Even Samuel Hargrove, after an initial period of cool politeness, thought enough to offer his congratulations and approve a loan for additional building materials when costs ran higher than Thomas had anticipated. As summer gave way to fall, the house took shape on the hillside overlooking the valley. It was modest but well-designed 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, a comfortable parlor with large windows to capture the morning light. Thomas crafted special touches throughout wrought iron fixtures, a custom stove grate, decorative railings for the porch. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, the aspens surrounding Willow Creek ablaze with autumn color. The ceremony was held in the church, filled to capacity with townspeople and friends from neighboring communities. Reverend Parker officiated, his kind face beaming as he spoke of love's endurance and the joining of 2 lives into one. Naomi was radiant in a gown of ivory silk, her chestnut hair adorned with tiny white flowers. As she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her eyes never left Thomas's face. For his part, Thomas could scarcely believe his good fortune as he watched her approach, this woman who had given him a second chance at happiness. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Parker began, his voice carrying through the hushed church. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Thomas James Calloway and Naomi Elizabeth Cunningham in holy matrimony." The service was simple but heartfelt. When the time came to exchange vows, Thomas took Naomi's hands in his voice steady with conviction. "Naomi, I take you as my wife, promising to love and cherish you through all the days of our lives. I pledge to be your faithful husband, your constant friend, your partner in all things. Where I once wandered, with you I have found home. Where I once sought fortune, with you I have found wealth beyond measure. I give you my heart, my trust, and my future from this day forward." Tears shimmered in Naomi's eyes as she responded. "Thomas, I take you as my husband, promising to love and cherish you through all the days of our lives. I pledge to be your faithful wife, your steadfast companion, your partner in all things. You have always held my heart, even when paths and years divided us. Now I give you my trust, my joy, and my future from this day forward." When Reverend Parker pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas drew Naomi into a tender kiss, sealing their vows amid the applause and happy tears of their friends and neighbors. The celebration continued at the town hall, transformed for the occasion with autumn flowers, lanterns, and tables laden with food contributed by nearly every household in Willow Creek. There was dancing and laughter, toasts and well wishes, the community coming together to honor the new couple. As the evening drew to a close, Thomas and Naomi slipped away, boarding the buggy Thomas had prepared for the short journey to their new home. The house was complete, furnished with a mixture of new pieces and family heirlooms Nathaniel had insisted they take. Thomas helped Naomi down from the buggy, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck as he carried her into their home for the first time as husband and wife. "Welcome home, Mrs. Calloway," he said softly, setting her down in the parlor. Naomi looked around at the space they had created together, the comfortable furniture, the bookshelves already filled with her collection, the large stone fireplace Thomas had built with his own hands. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning back to him. "Everything is perfect." Thomas drew her into his arms, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment. "I used to dream about this," he admitted. "Coming home to you at the end of each day, building a life together. I never thought I'd be fortunate enough to make that dream real. Yet here we are," Naomi said, her eyes reflecting the same wonder he felt. "Here we are," he agreed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And here we'll stay." As winter settled over Montana, Thomas and Naomi built their life together in the valley home. Their days fell into a pleasant rhythm, early mornings sharing coffee by the fire, parting for their respective work in town, reuniting in the evenings to share the day's events. They weathered their first disagreements and celebrated their first holidays as a married couple, learning each other's habits and preferences, deepening their bond day by day. The town continued to grow around them. New families arrived, drawn by the railroad's expansion and the fertile land. The school flourished under Naomi's guidance, eventually requiring an assistant teacher to handle the increasing number of students. Thomas's blacksmith business thrived as well, his reputation for quality work spreading throughout the territory. When spring arrived, bringing wildflowers to the hillsides and new lambs to the neighboring farms, Naomi shared news that filled Thomas with indescribable joy. They were expecting a child in the late fall. "Are you happy?" she asked as they sat on their porch swing, Thomas's hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Naomi, you've given me everything I ever wanted and so much more." She leaned her head against his shoulder, content in the quiet evening. "Do you ever miss it? The traveling, the adventure?" Thomas considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss the mountains or the wide open spaces, but no, I don't miss the life. Not when I have this you, our home, our future." "Good," she murmured. "Because your adventures are just beginning, Thomas Calloway. Fatherhood may be the biggest one yet," he laughed, pulling her closer. "As long as I'm facing it with you, I'm ready for anything." As the seasons turned and their family grew, first with a daughter, Emma, born in November, and 2 years later with a son, James, Thomas often thought back to that fateful day when he'd walked into the schoolhouse with a bouquet of wildflowers, his heart in his throat. How close he had come to losing everything that mattered, On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they watched their children playing in the autumn leaves outside their valley home, Naomi turned to him with a smile that still took his breath away. "Any regrets?" she asked softly. Thomas shook his head, drawing her into his embrace. "Not a single one, except perhaps that it took me so long to find my way back to you. You found your way," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "That's all that matters." And as the sun set over their little valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Thomas Calloway knew with absolute certainty that after years of searching, he had finally found the greatest treasure of all, not in distant mountains or bustling frontier towns, but right here, in the love of the woman who had always been his true north, his home, his heart.